All right, so lesson 33, the parable of the wheat and the tares. There's some similarities to the lesson that we had yesterday, okay, with the sowing of the seed. So look at Matthew chapter 13. Okay. Are you counting? That's your Bible there. Matthew chapter 13, starting at verse 24. Okay. Matthew 13, starting at verse 24. Ready? Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, now hang on, let's stop there a second. We talked about this yesterday. Parables teach us about what? What's the job of parables? To teach us about Garrett? But to help us teach about heaven, they compare heavenly things to what? Courtney? Earthly things. Okay, so just remember that. Every time we read the word parable, we're using earthly things that we can understand to help teach about heavenly things. Good. Verse 24. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came, and sowed tares among the wheat, and went his way. But when the blade was sprung up, and brought forth fruit, then appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came, and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in thy field? From whence hath it tares? He said unto them, An enemy hath done this. The servants said unto him, Wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, Nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, ye root up also the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. So, 7 verses here, but an important parable. Okay? The kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. So you have a farmer. Once again, he goes out, puts a bag over his shoulder, probably filled with brand new good seeds that he had been storing from last year. He reaches in and he walks through that field, casting it out. Okay? Maybe rakes over top of it to help it get into the soil real good so that he'll have a plentiful harvest of wheat for his animals. But then we see some background stuff. But while the men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. This is not an uncommon thing, sadly, it seems like. I mean, for this to be a parable that really impacted the people in the Bible times, that must not have been common. Grant doesn't get along with Jesse. Well, he knows what he'll do. He's his next door neighbor. He didn't like it that maybe Jesse's cow got loose and came into Grant's field and started to, eat of his food. And maybe it was a pig or something got in there and started to dig up and root up all of his nice new vegetable plants. So Grant says, I know what I'll do. In the middle of the night, I'll wait till I see Jesse out there all day long, spreading that nice wheat seed. And then he gets and he rakes it in, and it's just a beautiful field. And that night, Grant sneaks out of his house, and he goes and he's taking a whole bunch of seeds from a bunch of weeds out in the field, and he walks through Jesse's field, and he casts them everywhere. Ha, says Grant, that'll serve him. Might not punish him today, might not punish him tomorrow, but down the road, he's going to regret having let that cow and pig come into my field. Sadly, it must not have been uncommon for that to happen, for the people to understand this parable. But anyways, this enemy came. Who would the enemy be that comes in the middle of the night? Who do you think that's a picture of? Jesse? Satan? Comes in the middle of the night and he sows tares among the wheat. Okay? Now, wheat, you guys see winter wheat. Many farmers right now, as they have taken up their soybean fields or maybe plowed under some of their their alfalfa fields, they plant winter wheat, right? Maybe it gets about a foot tall, it's nice and green. But next spring it will continue to grow, and you'll get a nice golden stalk, right? And what's at the top of the stalk? Jesse? Yeah, nice head. And in that head are lots of seeds, wheat seeds that can be used to grind to make into bread and other things. Right? And so the farmer will harvest that wheat and he'll sell that. And then he'll go out and he'll a lot of times go out and the nice big tall golden stalks, He'll gather those up and make those into what? What does a farmer turn those into? Jesse? Hay bales. Nice bedding for the animals. So think of that beautiful blade that's going to grow up yet this fall, and then a nice tall stem, a golden stem with a nice golden head on it. Well, that's what wheat looks like. The enemy that came, he's sowing these seeds, and these seeds, when they begin to grow, are going to look just like the wheat. They're going to grow up small and green, and then all of a sudden, as they begin to mature, now you're going to notice, oh boy, something's wrong here. We've got weeds mixed in here. The heads might be a little bit of a different color, or the stalks may grow a little bit differently. So, but the problem is with this seed, the seed that's been sowed in, that's weed seed, not only is it going to mix itself in there, but usually a lot of times weeds, what do we know about their root system? Maybe you've gone out into the yard and mom and dad have had you pull some weeds, or you go in the garden. What about the root system of a weed? Megan? The root system of a weed grows all over the place. It gets entangled into everything. It steals the nutrients and the moisture from everything else. Okay? Roots are amazing things. You can almost say, and they are alive in a sense. They're smart, they're intelligent. Maybe some of you who live out in the country, you have septic systems, right? There's one thing that the plumber will say, never to plant near a septic system. Never plant a tree. Especially of all trees, a maple tree. Because what will the roots of the maple tree do if you plant a maple tree too close to your septic system? Joe?
The roots will replicate.
How?
By going through the concrete.
A tree can sense where the moisture is in the ground, and it says, hey, that tank over there, that septic system that comes out of their house, it's full of water. And so its roots begin to grow towards there. And then there's pipes coming out of the septic system where water is out there. And those roots grow towards the water too. So that pretty soon, you may have some pretty serious issues. Okay? Even those of you that live in town, if your house has used old types of pipes. Okay? Caleb and Jen Van Barren, right next to church, there's a beautiful, huge maple tree in their front yard. Problem is it needs to get cut down. Well, it used to be in theirs. Now it's the other people's problem. But the roots were always growing. Every couple of years they'd have to send the plumber to send a machine down in there to open it back up because the roots were filling into that tube down there. Well, that's what the roots are like here. Okay? This tare that's sown in the field, its roots are going to get all entangled. It's going to steal the moisture and the nutrients from these good plants. And so that's why when the blade was sprung up, and brought forth fruit, there appeared the tares also. Okay? So let's take a look at, before we get into it too much, let's take a look at what those different things might be a picture of. So we said the devil is the enemy who comes in the middle of the night. But who is the sower a picture of? Garrett?
God.
It's a picture. Well, let's be more specific. Yes, Jesus. Okay? And who are the good seed that are cast out, that are planted in the field? Who are the good seed a picture of? Who do you think they're a picture of? Micah? Good, God's children. The field here is a little bit different. The field that they're sown in, okay, is going to be the world of the church. Okay? These children are planted in the church. God plants these children in this specific field, and all the fields in the world in this field, because it's the field of the church. It's where they will grow. It's where they will be fed and nourished and watered. Okay? Who are the tares then that the devil came and cast out into that field? Who would the tares be, the weeds, be a picture of? Emma, what do you think? Yeah, the wicked, the reprobate, the ungodly. So let's think about that. The wicked are in the church, because that field is a picture of the church, and here the wicked are planted with the church. That's like Jacob and Esau. Here you have two young men. growing up in the same household, learning the same Bible stories, but yet we know Jacob was a child of God and Esau was not. But they grew up in the same place. That's the picture that we're going to see here a little bit more. So now let's go on to the servants. And there in verse 27, they come out in the field and they, of course, they see the weed seed and they can't believe it. So they go and they check with their master and say, now, master, didn't you sow good seed in there? How come there's these other things in the field? How come there's this weed? Didn't you? And of course the master has to clarify. So like we said, the young plants look just like the wheat at the beginning. There's no way to tell the difference. So do all the young people, all of the people in the church, all those children who we have baptized. The Bible doesn't promise that every single one of them, head for head, is a child of God. You can maybe think of children who have been baptized in the church, that you've seen baptized, that are no longer part of the church. Okay? You go to catechism together. Okay? You go to school together. You go to Sunday school. You sit under the preaching. But God doesn't guarantee that every single person who goes through all of that is one of His children. We see that sometimes people leave the church. They don't want anything to do with the church, sadly, anymore. But they had the same catechism, you say. They had the same preaching. It is true. Okay? And that's what God is teaching here in this lesson. We'll analyze it a little bit more. I asked you to look up 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 through 5. Okay? Where it says, moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant how that all of our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So Paul is teaching the people here, saying, look, people, think of Moses. Think of all those people going through the wilderness. They all passed through the Red Sea, right? In a sense, they were all baptized. They all heard God speaking from the mount and preaching and teaching them. But were all of them saved? No, we see many wicked reprobate that God had to destroy and kill. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And many others that were in the wilderness with the people had to be destroyed and killed because they did not show they were children of God. And so verse 5 says this, but with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. So that shows everybody went through the Red Sea. Everyone had the picture of baptism, but not all were saved. Not all were children of God. Okay? And then also I said to look up 1 John there 2 verse 19. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us, but they went out that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. Some people will leave. They grew up with us. Okay? I pray that that's none of you here. But I know there are students, there are kids that I went to school with. I sat in 6th and 7th and 8th grade and all through high school with them. And they want nothing to do with the truth of God's Word any longer. Okay? They want he or she has gone out from us. They've left. And they live a life of sin. So that's something that's sad. I look back at those fellow classmates. Maybe some of them I even interacted with quite a bit. And pray that doesn't happen to any of you, that's not any of you here. And we trust that that's not the case. Okay? But anyway, so those servants are really concerned, and they go to their master and they say, well, what do you want us to do? Okay? And so the master here, he said unto them, an enemy hath done him. And obviously the servants, they want to know, what should we do? Should we go and take care of it? Well, that's a good question. And I can say I sinfully am like these servants here sometimes. I think, boy, there's some people that really don't seem committed to church. They're not part of any Bible study. They miss church half the time. They're not very reverent. If you speak to them afterwards, they might use foul language even. Maybe it would be good if God put a hard question to us and He made the church split so that some would remain and those that were weak would probably find it an excuse to leave. And I think, well, that would help us have a strong church family. There wouldn't be weak ones among us. But that's wrong thinking on my part. And that's what God is teaching me here, but each of us too. Okay? There are those in the church that want to make it a pure church. What can we do to cast out all these people who aren't committed like me? How can we get rid of them? And that's what these servants are acting like, Master, how can we get rid of these bad seeds? How can we pluck them up and get rid of them? The Master says, no. Nope, that's not the case. We're going to leave them here. We're going to let them grow. Because if we do something that will cause, well, if we do something along those lines, we may not lose, we may act, and this is a tough thing to speak of here because we know God promises to His children He will never lose them. But it's as if I did something foolish that would cause not only the weak ones to leave, but I might lose a child of God or two. They might leave, come back over time because they're a child of God, but maybe their family will be ruined, their children will no longer be. So we wouldn't want to have to cause that. We won't want to have to make it so that some leave. Okay? It's not we be careful there because we know that God promises, okay, that He will save His children. But anyways, there's always been in the church, there's always been godly and ungodly. There's Jacob and Esau. We think of the people in Israel in the wilderness. We think of all of history. Judas was a disciple, Judas Iscariot. He went with all these people. He saw Jesus and then he left. We see that there's always going to be elect and reprobate together in the church. It's not our job to cast them out and decide who to get rid of and what can we do to make the church a pure place. Okay? It's because in of us is a fear. We're a fear that if the ungodly are in the church, they may weaken us or they might make us a little bit weaker. Isaiah 1 verse 8 and 9 said to look up there, and the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, as a lodge in a garden of cucumbers, as a besieged city. Except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant. We should have been of Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah. Okay? God will always have a small portion of His church, but He will also preserve them. Don't be afraid that because there might be an ungodly person or two that goes to church with us, that you are going to be destroyed and lost as well. No, God will be faithful to you. Okay? And then 2 Timothy 2 verse 19, nevertheless the foundation of God standeth sure, having this seal, the Lord knoweth them that are His, and let every one that nameth the name of Christ depart from iniquity. You can be sure that God will preserve you. Even if there are reprobate sitting next to you in church, it's not your job it's your job to teach them, instruct them, and tell them what they're doing wrong. Don't be afraid to do that. But it's not your job to get them kicked out of the church. The Lord will take care of that. Okay? So, these servants are not supposed to go and try to gather because as they're pulling them up, they're probably going to ruin half the harvest. The Master says, let them grow up together. And then at the end, at the time of harvest, I will say, reapers, gather ye together first the tares. Okay, so let's go and let's take a look at that harvest here. Okay, when will the harvest be? When do you think that is? Courtney? The end of time. At the end of the world, the harvest will be. Who are the reapers who are going to come and separate the good from the bad? So at the end of the world, who will God send to be the reapers to separate the good and the bad? What do you think that will be? Jen? Any guesses? Just take a wild guess. Kenton? Yeah, it's God's angels. God will send His angels to separate, okay, the elect from the reprobate. Matthew 13, verse 41, I said there, the Son of Man shall send forth His angels, and they shall gather out of His kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity. Okay? Jesus there teaches, I will send the angels at the end of all time. They will come and they will do the separating. Okay? Don't worry about you trying to do that. So, that's what the Master says. That's what I'll do at the end. They'll separate them. They'll burn up. Obviously, that's a picture of burning in hell. They'll burn up the weed seed and harvest and keep the good seed. Okay? So, that's of great comfort to us. In the church will be reprobate. They'll probably leave eventually, like I talked about in my case. As people got older, they began to demonstrate that they weren't showing forth any fruit, and they left the church. They didn't want to be a part of it. A sad thing. But that's what we see. Okay? For you, if that means someone in your family, if it could mean a brother or sister, or even a parent, sadly, or grandparents who one day leave the church, you be faithful and strong. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right and do the right thing. Okay? So, God will separate, but he'll do it on his own time, not on our time. So that's the picture here of the parable of the wheat and tares. In the church will be both godly and ungodly. So Garrett was talking yesterday, he said something about the church, so hopefully that kind of explains it a little bit more. In the church will be godly and ungodly. God will preserve his people. Don't be afraid of that. And God will decide in his own time when he wants to separate the ungodly from the church.